The hallway smelled like disinfectant and boiled vegetables. Audrey Hepburn noticed it immediately. It was the kind of smell that takes you back to places you'd rather not remember. She stood just inside the entrance of the Children's Hospital in Geneva, Switzerland, holding a small bouquet of flowers she'd bought from a street vendor 3 blocks away. No cameras, no entourage. Just Audrey, age 61, thinner than most people remembered her, wearing a plain gray coat that had seen better days. It was November 1989, late afternoon. The light coming through the windows was that pale European winter light that makes everything feel suspended in time. Audrey hadn't told anyone she was coming. The hospital staff didn't know. The patients didn't know. She'd simply walked in through the front door like any other visitor, signed the registry with handwriting so small you could barely read it, and asked quietly if she could visit the long-term care wing. The nurse at the desk looked up, did a double take, and started to say something. But Audrey put a finger to her lips, a gentle gesture, a request. "Please don't make this a thing." The nurse nodded, understanding something unspoken, and pointed down the hall. "Third floor, room 304. There's someone there who hasn't had a visitor in 3 weeks." Audrey took the stairs instead of the elevator. Her footsteps were soft on the linoleum, almost apologetic. She could hear the building's mechanical hum, the distant sound of a television playing in a common room, the murmur of nurses talking at a station somewhere. But mostly it was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles over places where people wait. This is the true story of what happened in that hospital room. Not the public Audrey, not the icon in the black dress and pearls, not the face from Roman Holiday or Breakfast at Tiffany's. This is the woman who survived war and hunger and fear, who spent the second half of her life trying to pay forward a kindness she'd received as a starving child. This is the moment one patient never forgot, the words that stayed, the reason a nurse still talks about it 30 years later, and the private weight Audrey carried that made her walk into hospitals alone, when most celebrities wouldn't walk into them at all. Room 304 was at the end of the hall. The door was half open. Audrey paused outside, listening. She could hear breathing, steady but labored. The soft beep of a monitor, nothing else. She knocked gently on the door frame, and a voice inside said, "Come in," with the tone of someone who expected a nurse, not a visitor. Audrey stepped inside. The room was small, one window with thin curtains that let in that pale afternoon light. A single bed, a chair, a nightstand with a water pitcher and a small stack of magazines that looked untouched. And in the bed, a woman, mid-50s maybe, thin in the way that long illness makes you thin. Hair cropped short, growing back unevenly after chemotherapy. Eyes that looked tired, not from sleep, but from something deeper. The woman looked at Audrey and blinked slowly, like her brain was trying to process something that didn't make sense. "I'm sorry," Audrey said softly. "I hope I'm not intruding. The nurse said you might appreciate some company." The woman stared. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again. You're Audrey Hepburn." Audrey smiled, but it was a small smile, almost sad. "I am. But right now, I'm just someone who thought you might like to talk. If you don't want company, I understand. I can leave." The woman didn't say anything for a long moment. She just looked at Audrey standing there in her plain coat, holding flowers from a street vendor, looking uncertain. Not like a movie star, like someone's aunt who wasn't sure if she was welcome. "No," the woman finally said. "Please, stay." Audrey moved to the chair beside the bed and sat down carefully, like she was afraid of taking up too much space. She placed the flowers on the nightstand. They were simple, daisies, nothing fancy, the kind of flowers that don't demand attention. "What's your name?" Audrey asked. "Claire." "It's nice to meet you, Claire." They sat in silence for a moment. Not an uncomfortable silence, just two people in a room adjusting to each other's presence. Audrey's hands were folded in her lap. Claire noticed they were elegant hands, but also old hands, veined, spotted with age. Human hands. "I don't understand," Claire said finally. "Why are you here, in this room, with me?" Audrey looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because I know what it's like to feel invisible." Claire's eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. She turned her head away, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I'm not usually like this." "It's all right," Audrey said quietly. "It's just—" Claire wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I was a teacher. For 32 years. I taught literature. I had students. I had colleagues. I had a whole life. And now I've been in this room for 6 months. And my daughter calls once a week because she feels obligated. And my son hasn't visited since August. And I just—" She stopped, her voice breaking. "I just feel like I'm disappearing. Like I already died and nobody noticed." Audrey didn't respond immediately. She just listened. And that listening felt more important than anything she could have said. After a moment, she reached over and gently took Claire's hand. The touch was light, not intrusive, just present. "You're not invisible to me," Audrey said. I see you." Claire looked at her, and something in Audrey's eyes made her believe it. This wasn't a celebrity saying something inspirational. This was a human being who understood something about invisibility, about being forgotten, about the fear that your life didn't matter. "Can I tell you something?" Audrey asked. Claire nodded. "When I was 15 years old, I was hiding in a house in the Netherlands during the war. We were starving, truly starving. Not hungry, starving. We made soup from tulip bulbs because there was nothing else. My uncle had been executed. My brother had been taken for forced labor. And I remember lying on a floor so thin I could feel my own bones pressing into the wood, thinking, no one will remember I existed. If I die here, I'll just be one more name no one bothers to count." Claire was completely still, listening. "But I survived," Audrey continued. "And after the war, relief workers came. UNICEF, the Red Cross. People who didn't know me, who didn't have to care, brought food and medicine and told us we mattered. They didn't just save my body. They saved the part of me that believed life was worth living." Audrey's voice was quiet, but every word carried weight. "So when you tell me you feel invisible, I understand. I know that feeling. I know what it's like to wonder if your existence registered with anyone. But Claire, I need you to understand something." Audrey leaned forward slightly, and her eyes held Claire's. "You don't have to be brave for me. You don't have to pretend this isn't hard. The fact that you're still here, still breathing, still trying, that's enough. You don't need to be more than that." Claire's tears came harder now, but they were different tears. Not the tears of someone who felt forgotten, the tears of someone who'd just been seen. "I taught literature for 32 years, Claire whispered. "I wanted to matter. I wanted to leave something behind." "You did," Audrey said simply. "You taught for 32 years. Do you know how many students that is? How many minds you shaped? How many books you made them love? That doesn't disappear because you're sick. That's already out there, already part of the world. You've already left something behind." They sat together for another 20 minutes. They didn't talk much. Audrey told her a little about the children she'd visited in Somalia and Ethiopia, about the faces that stayed with her, about the guilt of being famous when most people suffered in silence. Claire told her about a student who'd sent her a letter years ago saying her class had changed his life, about the novel she'd always wanted to write but never started, about the fear that time had run out. And when Audrey finally stood to leave, she squeezed Claire's hand one more time. "Thank you for letting me visit," Audrey said. "This meant more to me than you know." "Why?" Claire asked. "Why did you come here, really?" Audrey paused at the door and looked back. "Because someone came for me once. when I was the one who felt invisible, and I never forgot it. So now I come for others. It's the only way I know how to say thank you." Audrey walked out of that room, down the hallway, and out of the hospital the same way she came in. Quietly, without announcement. The nurse at the desk watched her leave and later told her supervisor what had happened. The supervisor didn't believe her until she checked the visitor log and saw the small, barely legible signature. Claire stayed in that hospital for another 2 months. The cancer that had brought her there eventually took her life in early 1990. But in those final weeks, she told the nurses about the afternoon Audrey Hepburn had visited, about what she'd said, about the way it had made her feel seen. The nurses wrote it down because they knew it mattered, because stories like that don't come from celebrities trying to do good PR. They come from human beings who understand pain and choose to sit with it instead of running from it. Years later, one of those nurses was interviewed for a documentary about Audrey's humanitarian work. She was asked what she remembered most about Audrey's hospital visits, and she said this: "She never performed. She never acted like she was doing charity. She just sat with people and made them feel like they weren't alone. That was her gift, not beauty, not fame, presence." Audrey Hepburn died in January 1993, just over 3 years after that visit to room 304. The world mourned the actress, the icon, the face that had defined elegance for generations. But the people who really knew her mourned something else. They mourned a woman who had survived horror and chosen kindness, who had been starved as a child and spent her adult life trying to make sure other children didn't starve, who walked into hospitals alone because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible and believed no one should feel that way. The words Audrey said to Claire that afternoon weren't recorded. There was no camera, no journalist, no official account, just 2 people in a room and a moment that mattered more than most moments do. But the nurse remembered one line. She wrote it in her journal that night and kept it for 30 years. "You don't have to be brave for me. You don't have to pretend this isn't hard. The fact that you're still here, still breathing, still trying, that's enough." That's what Audrey understood that most people don't. That suffering doesn't need to be fixed or solved or explained away. Sometimes it just needs to be acknowledged, witnessed, held gently by someone who's willing to sit in the room and not look away. On a cold November afternoon in 1989, Audrey Hepburn walked into a hospital in Geneva carrying flowers she'd bought from a street vendor. She visited a woman who felt invisible. She sat in a chair beside a bed and listened. She said a few words that stayed with that woman until she died. And then she walked out the same way she came in, quietly, without fanfare, without needing credit or recognition or applause. That's who Audrey Hepburn really was. Not the woman on the movie screen, the woman in room 304. The one who understood that the smallest acts of kindness are often the ones that matter most. The one who knew that being seen, really seen, can change everything. The one who carried her own pain so carefully that she knew exactly how to sit with someone else's. Some moments don't make headlines. Some conversations don't get recorded. Some kindnesses happen in hospital rooms where no one is watching. But they matter. They echo. They stay with the people who needed them. And decades later, when someone asks what it meant to be in the presence of Audrey Hepburn, the answer isn't about movies or fashion or fame. It's about a quiet afternoon, a plain gray coat, flowers from a street vendor, and the grace of someone who understood that you don't have to be extraordinary to matter. You just have to be there, present, willing to see someone when they feel invisible, willing to sit with pain instead of running from it, willing to offer the same kindness you once received when you needed it most. That's the story they don't tell about Audrey Hepburn, but it's the one that matters.